That dress was a mid-tier design. The King family had never accepted mediocrity. In the middle of the lavish engagement party, the insults landed squarely on the bride. The groom only forced a smile, unwilling to defend her, while the crowd whispered, "A poor girl climbing high, she'll be cast aside soon." Everyone thought she would bow her head, quietly accepting her role as the outsider. But no one knew that with a single tap on her phone, the very $950 million contract the King family flaunted could be erased in an instant. Isabella Torres stood in the center of the ballroom, her hands folded neatly in front of her plain cream dress. The chandelier light caught the simple silver clip holding her dark hair back, and her bare face, without a trace of makeup, looked almost too soft for the glittering crowd. She wasn't what they expected. Not for Nathaniel King, heir to a real estate empire. Not for this room dripping with wealth and judgment. The party was held at the King family estate, a sprawling mansion with marble floors and gold-trimmed walls. Every guest was someone: senators, CEOs, old money with sharp tongues. Isabella didn't flinch as their eyes raked over her. She just stood there, holding a glass of untouched champagne, her posture straight but not stiff, like someone who had been taught to carry herself through storms. Victoria King, Nathaniel's mother, swept toward her. Her emerald gown caught the light like a peacock's tail. At 55, her face was pulled tight by surgery, and her smile never reached her eyes. She stopped in front of Isabella, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Sweetheart, that dress, it's just not up to our standards. Did you borrow it from a thrift shop?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. A man in a tailored suit leaned toward his wife, muttering, "She looks like she wandered in from a bus stop." Isabella's fingers tightened slightly on her glass, but her face stayed calm. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence seemed to irritate Victoria more, who turned to a woman nearby and said, "Imagine my son with someone so ordinary." A woman in a sleek black gown, pearls gleaming against her neck, approached Isabella with a pitying smile. She was a distant cousin of the King's, known for her biting wit at charity galas. "Oh, darling, you must tell us where you shop." "I could use a laugh," she said, her voice dripping with false kindness. The group around her tittered, their eyes glinting with amusement. Isabella set her glass down, her movements slow and deliberate, then looked at the woman. Her voice was quiet, but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "I shop where people don't need to buy their confidence." The cousin's smile froze, and a few guests shifted uncomfortably. But the moment passed as another voice called out, "She's got nerve, I'll give her that." The laughter resumed, but Isabella's eyes held a steady fire unnoticed by the crowd. Nathaniel stood a few feet away, adjusting his cufflinks, his handsome face fixed in a practiced smile. He was 29, tall, with the kind of charm that made people forgive his arrogance. But he didn't step forward, didn't say a word to defend her. His eyes flicked to Isabella, then away, as if he were embarrassed to be tied to her. The crowd noticed. A woman with diamond earrings and a fake laugh leaned in, her voice carrying, "She's clearly after his money. Why else would he pick her?" Another guest, a balding man with a Rolex, chuckled, "She's got no class. Nathan's slumming it." Isabella's lips parted as if she might speak, but she closed them again. She placed her glass onto a passing waiter's tray, her movement slow and deliberate. "Hey, before we go further, if this story is hitting you, maybe you've felt that kind of sting before. Grab your phone real quick. Like this video, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to share these moments together, to walk through the pain and come out stronger. Alright, let's keep going. The insults didn't stop. Adrian Cole, the King family's lawyer, sidled up next, his slick grin barely hiding his contempt. He was 45, with a sharp jaw and a habit of talking like he owned the room. "Isabella, right? If you really loved Nathan, you'd have brought something to the table. A ring with the Torres name. Maybe. Oh, wait. Probably worth nothing." The crowd laughed again, louder this time, and Isabella's eyes met his. For a moment, the room seemed to quiet. She tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but clear. "You seem very sure of that." Adrian blinked, caught off guard, but quickly recovered with a smirk. "Oh, honey, I know a gold digger when I see one." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The guests ate them up, their whispers growing bolder. A young man, barely out of his 20s, with slicked-back hair and an expensive watch, decided to join the fray. He was a friend of Nathaniel's, always eager to prove his place among the elite. "Hey, Isabella, do you even know how to use a salad fork?" he called out, holding his own up like a trophy. The room roared with laughter, and he grinned, basking in the attention. Isabella turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. She picked up a fork from the nearest table, twirled it once in her fingers, and set it down with a soft clink. "I know enough to eat without making a scene," she said, her voice so calm it seemed to suck the air out of his bravado. The laughter died down, and his cheeks flushed red as he looked away. But someone else quickly filled the silence with another jab. Across the room, a woman in a red dress, some heiress with too much perfume, leaned toward her friend. "Look at her shoes. Scuffed. She doesn't belong here." Another voice chimed in, a man with a loud tie and an even louder laugh. "Nathan's mother will have her out by the wedding." Isabella's hand rushed the edge of her small clutch, her fingers pausing there like she was grounding herself. She didn't look at Nathaniel, who was now chatting with a group of men, his back to her. The room felt colder, the air thick with judgment. Victoria circled back, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Dear, you must feel so out of place. Why don't you sit in the corner? Less noticeable." Isabella's gaze flicked up, steady and unyielding. "I'm fine where I am," she said, her voice low but firm. The room paused for just a second before the laughter started again. An older man, a retired banker with a paunch and a condescending smirk, decided to take a shot. He leaned against a pillar, swirling his whiskey glass. "You know, girl, you're brave to stand there. But bravery doesn't buy you a seat at this table. You're out of your league." Isabella's fingers stilled on her clutch. She turned to face him, her movements slow, almost deliberate. She stepped closer, just enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "Funny," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "I always thought leagues were for people too scared to play the real game." The banker's smirk faltered, and a few guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Victoria's eyes narrowed, sensing a shift she didn't like. The party dragged on, and the insults grew sharper. A young woman, maybe a cousin of Nathaniel's, with glossy lips and a cruel smile, stepped closer. "You know, Isabella, you're brave to show up looking like that. Most girls would have at least tried." Her friend snickered, and Isabella's fingers twitched like she was about to reach for something, but stopped herself. She looked at the woman, her eyes calm but piercing. "Tried what, exactly?" The question landed like a stone, and the woman faltered, her smile slipping. Before she could recover, Victoria raised her glass, her voice cutting through the chatter. "To my son's future, and a bride who will learn her place." The toast drew cheers, but Isabella didn't move. She stood there, her face unreadable, as if she were waiting for something to await her, young and nervous, tripped slightly as he passed Isabella, a tray of drinks wobbling in his hands. A woman nearby, draped in furs despite the warm evening, laughed sharply. "Careful, boy. Don't ruin her dress. It's probably the best thing she owns." The crowd chuckled, and the waiter's face flushed as he mumbled an apology. Isabella reached out, steadying the tray with one hand, her touch gentle but firm. She looked at the woman, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not the dress that matters. It's the person wearing it." The waiter shot her a grateful glance before hurrying away, but the woman in furs just scoffed, turning to her friends. "She's got a mouth on her, I'll give her that." Isabella's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't respond further. Her eyes scanned the room as if memorizing every face. Years ago, a little girl sat on a hardwood floor, her small hands tracing the edges of a book. Her father, a man with kind eyes and a stern voice, knelt beside her. "You don't need to shout, Isabella," he said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You don't need to prove anything. Just be." The memory flickered as Isabella's eyes caught a glint of light from a passing car outside the mansion's windows. It was the same kind of car her father used to drive, a black sedan, understated but powerful. She blinked, and the memory was gone, replaced by the buzz of the party and the weight of 100 eyes. The King family wasn't done. Adrian, emboldened by the crowd, leaned in again, his voice loud enough to CA. RRY. You know, Nathan, she's cute, but she's dragging you down. No pedigree, no connections. Nathaniel laughed, a nervous sound, and rubbed the back of his neck. Come on, Adrian. Give her a break. But his words were weak, half-hearted, and the room knew it. Isabella's jaw tightened for just a moment before she smoothed it out. She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was counting every face, every voice. Then she spoke, her voice steady. You talk a lot about connections. What's yours worth? The question hung there unanswered as Adrian's smirk faded. The crowd shifted uneasily, but no one stopped. They were too caught up in their own game. A woman with a designer handbag, her nails painted a sharp red, decided to escalate things. She was a socialite, known for her Instagram posts and her knack for cutting people down with a smile. Isabella, honey, do you even have a job? Or are you just planning to live off Nathan's trust fund? The question drew gasps and giggles from the crowd, and Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Isabella's hand rested on the edge of a table, her fingers tapping once, twice, like a metronome keeping time. She looked at the woman, her voice even. I work for what I have. Can you say the same? The socialite's smile tightened, and she tossed her hair, but the crowd's laughter was less certain now. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. Victoria took the stage next, her voice booming over the microphone. Let's talk about the future of the King family. We have just secured a $950 million deal with Torres Global Tech, run by some mysterious CEO who never shows his face. She paused for applause, her eyes gleaming with pride. That's the kind of power we bring to this family. Not everyone can keep up. The dig was obvious, and the guests laughed, their eyes darting to Isabella. She raised her brows slightly and lifted her glass. A deal with whom? She asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Adrian jumped in, eager to show off. Torres Global Tech, biggest tech conglomerate in the country. You wouldn't know them. Isabella's lips curved into a faint smile, almost invisible. She took a sip of her champagne. The crowd missed it entirely, too busy mocking the foolish bride. A man in a pinstripe suit, a hedge fund manager with a reputation for arrogance, decided to push further. He stepped close to Isabella, his voice loud and patronizing. You know, I've seen girls like you before. They think they can sneak into our world, but they always crash and burn. He gestured to the room as if it were his kingdom. Isabella's eyes flicked to his, her expression unreadable. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a plain silver pen, and twirled it between her fingers. Some of us don't need to sneak, she said, her voice low but steady. The man laughed, but it was forced, and a few guests nearby fell silent, watching her closely. The pen caught the light, and for a moment it seemed to carry more weight than the room itself. The night wore on, and Isabella moved through the crowd like a shadow, her presence quiet, but unshakable. A man in a velvet jacket bumped into her, spilling his drink. Watch it, sweetheart, he snapped, brushing past her like she was nothing. She stepped back, graceful as ever, and set her clutch on a table. Her fingers lingered on the edge of a small card inside, a business card, plain white, with a Torres Global logo. She didn't pull it out, didn't need to. But her eyes flickered with something new, a spark of decision. The room didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, too busy tearing her down, but Isabella was done waiting. The wedding day came fast. The King estate had transformed into a spectacle of wealth. White roses lined every path, and a massive tent housed 1,000 guests, all dressed to impress. Isabella stood at the altar, her dress simple but elegant, a soft ivory that hugged her frame without shouting for attention. No veil. No jewelry. Just her. The priest began the vows, his voice steady, but Victoria stood up, her face a mask of indignation. Before my son agrees, tell us, how much wealth does your family even have? The words echoed through the tent, and the guests erupted in laughter. A woman in a feathered hat leaned forward. Yeah. What's she bringing to the table? Nothing. Another voice, sharp and mean, added. She's not fit for this house. A young woman, a fashion influencer with 1 million followers, pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of Isabella at the altar. This is going viral, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Caption, when you show up to a king wedding looking like a thrift store reject. The crowd around her laughed, and phones started clicking, capturing Isabella's every move. She stood still, her hands clasped, but her eyes found the influencers. Make sure you get my good side, she said, her voice dry but steady. The influencer hesitated, lowering her phone slightly. But the laughter around her pushed her to keep going. Isabella's fingers brushed the edge of her dress, smoothing it once, a small gesture that seemed to anchor her against the storm. Nathaniel shifted on his feet, his eyes darting to his mother, then to Isabella. Mother, maybe you're right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The betrayal stung, visible in the way Isabella's fingers curled into her palms. Victoria pressed on, her voice loud and triumphant. This marriage would be a stain on our name. The guests nodded, their whispers growing louder. She's a nobody, one said. Nathan deserves better, another added. Isabella's eyes turned cold, like steel under moonlight. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stood there, her silence louder than their words. A man in a bow tie, a tech mogul who had made his fortune in startups, leaned toward his wife, his voice ing across the tent. I bet she's never even been to a boardroom. Probably thinks a merger is something you order at a diner. The laughter spread. Isabella's hand paused mid-motion, as if she'd been about to adjust her dress but stopped. She turned her head slightly, her eyes locking onto his. I know a bad deal when I see one, she said. Her voice was so quiet it barely reached him, but the words hit like a dart. The mogul's chuckle died in his throat, and he looked away, pretending to check his phone. The crowd didn't notice, too busy piling on with their own insults. Then she moved. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, and took the microphone from the priest. Her voice was calm, deliberate, like she was reading a verdict. Thank you for showing me your true faces. This wedding ends here. The tent exploded in gasps and murmurs. Nathaniel's face went red. How dare you insult me in front of everyone, he shouted, stepping toward her. Isabella didn't back down. I'm not running away, she said, her voice like ice. I'm canceling it. The crowd laughed, thinking she had cracked under pressure. She's insane, a man muttered. Lost her golden ticket, now pretending to have pride. A woman sneered. Isabella didn't respond. She just turned, her movement slow and sure, and walked toward the edge of the altar. Victoria wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her voice dripping with venom. No house, no fortune. You think leaving us means anything? Adrian, standing nearby, smirked. Taurus Global is tied to that $950 million deal with King Group. Without us, she has no future. Nathaniel joined in, his voice bitter. Without me, you're nothing. The guests piled on, their voices a chorus of cruelty. She's just a failure playing proud, one said. Isabella's hands slipped into her clutch, her fingers brushing her phone. She didn't look at them. Didn't need to. Her face was calm, her eyes focused like she was seeing something they couldn't. A woman in a glittering G.O.N., a real estate tycoon's wife, decided to add her voice. She stood up, wine glass raised as if making a toast. To the girl who thought she could play in our world and lost, she said, her smile vicious. The crowd cheered, but Isabella's eyes flicked to her, and she tilted her head just slightly. Some games aren't worth winning, she said, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the noise. The woman's glass trembled in her hand, and she sat down quickly, her face flushed. Isabella's fingers closed around her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen, a quiet promise in her steady grip. She pressed a button, and the giant screen behind the altar flickered to life. A statement appeared, bold and official. Taurus Global Tech terminates $950 million contract with King Group due to fraud and disrespect. The tent went silent. Adrian's face drained of color. Victoria's hand flew to her chest, her rings glinting as she trembled. Nathaniel collapsed into a chair, his mouth open. The crowd gasped, their whispers frantic. What? She's Torres Global? Isabella stepped forward, her voice even, unshaken. I don't need this family. I am Isabella Torres, the CEO you mocked. The words landed like a hammer, and the room broke apart in chaos. Years ago, a teenage Isabella sat in a boardroom, her father at the head of the table. He handed her a pen, his voice steady. This company is yours one day, Bella. But it's not about power. It's about truth. She nodded, her young face serious, clutching the pen like a promise. Now in the tent, her fingers brushed that same pen tucked into her clutch. She didn't pull it out. Didn't need to. The memory was enough. The King family unraveled. Victoria fell to her knees, her voice shaking. Forgive us. It was a misunderstanding. Restore the contract. Adrian, sweating, stepped forward. We can renegotiate. Just overlook our mistake. Nat. Haniel grabbed her hand, his voice desperate. I'm sorry. I still love you. Even the guests flipped, their voices syrupy with fake admiration. We've always admired you, one said. Isabella looked at them, her eyes distant, like she was seeing through them. She pulled her hand free from Nathaniel's grip, her movements slow and final. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her silence said everything. The man in the back, a minor investor in King Group, tried to salvage his dignity. He stood, his voice loud but shaky. You think you can just walk away and ruin us? You'll regret this. Isabella paused at the edge of the altar, her back to him. She turned her head just enough for him to see her profile. Regrets are for people who make bad choices, she said, her voice calm but final. The man sat down, his face pale as whispers of panic spread through the crowd. Phones buzzed with notifications, stock alerts, news updates. The King Empire crumbling in real time. Isabella didn't look back. She just kept walking, her step steady, her clutch tucked under her arm. She stepped to the microphone again, her voice steady as stone. Torres Global will transfer the deal to your rival corporation. The words hit like a shockwave. Phones buzzed as news alerts flooded in. King Group stock was crashing. Guests scrambled to their feet, some slipping out the exits, their faces pale. No one wanted to be tied to a family that had just lost everything. Headlines were already spreading. Bride humiliated. CEO strikes back. King Empire collapses. Isabella stood still, her hands folded, watching the chaos unfold. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just waited, her presence filling the room. Nathaniel wasn't done. He staggered to his feet, his face twisted with rage. No one will ever truly love you. Only your money. You'll die alone with no family. The words cut through the noise, and for a moment, the tent went quiet. A few old rivals in the crowd nodded, their voices low. That cold CEO will never know real happiness, one muttered. Isabella's fingers paused on her CLU. TCH, her eyes flickering with something raw, something human. She didn't respond. She just turned, her heels clicking as she walked toward the exit. A woman in a silver dress, a former friend of Victoria's, tried one last jab as Isabella passed. You'll always be alone, no matter how much money you have, she said, her voice sharp with desperation. Isabella stopped just for a moment and looked at her. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small worn photo, holding it up just long enough for the woman to see. A young Isabella with her father, smiling. I'm never alone, she said, her voice soft but unshakable, before tucking the photo away and continuing her walk. The woman's face crumpled, and the crowd fell silent, the weight of Isabella's words settling over them like dust. Then a man stepped forward from the guest seats. He was tall, with dark hair and a quiet confidence, his suit understated but sharp. The rival CEO, James Harper, head of Harper Dynamics. He took Isabella's hand, his voice low but clear. We didn't just sign a deal. I want to build a real family with you. The tent erupted again, this time with gasps of shock and awe. Isabella's eyes softened just for a moment as she looked at him. She didn't speak, but her hand tightened in his. The crowd parted as they walked out together, the applause growing louder, a wave of respect and disbelief. Isabella stepped into a waiting limo, the door closing with a soft thud, leaving the King family behind in the ruins of their own making. The fallout was swift. Victoria's social circle dropped her, her invitations to galas vanishing overnight. Adrian was fired by his firm, his name tied to the failed deal. Nathaniel's face was plastered across tabloids, his reputation shredded. One guest, the woman in the red dress, lost her sponsorship with a luxury brand after her cruel comments went viral. The consequences. Inces weren't loud or dramatic. They were just real, like gravity pulling a stone to the ground. Isabella didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her silence now carried the weight of truth. Years ago, a young Isabella stood in her father's office, staring at a framed photo of them together. He'd hugged her, his voice soft. "You're enough, Bella. Always." Now, as the limo pulled away, she glanced at James, his hand still in hers. The photo was long gone, but the feeling was there, steady and warm.
She didn't need to say it.
She just leaned back, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. The world kept turning. The King family faded, their name a cautionary tale. Isabella kept moving, her company stronger than ever, her life fuller than anyone could have guessed. She didn't need their approval. Never had, and for everyone who'd ever been looked down on, judged, or silenced, her story was a quiet promise. You're enough. You always were. The fight isn't loud. It's steady. And it's yours. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.